On July 23, 2026, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi posted a late-night selfie video on Instagram addressing the nationwide student protests over the paper leak scandal. He spoke directly to the camera, told them what the government was doing and what was coming next. By the end of the next day, 303 million people had watched it, 303 million views in less than 24 hours, the most viewed Instagram reel in the history of the platform. It is a statement about the scale of India and the depth of the conversation happening inside it. And then Meta blocked this video of PM Modi on Facebook. 4 days after breaking the most watched Instagram record in history, 4 days after 303 million people viewed a message from India's Prime Minister on Meta's own platform, Facebook restricted the same content in India, citing a legal request. Users attempting to access the video received a message. This content is not available in India. The media has been restricted in response to a legal request. Now, who sent the legal request? Why was it restricted in India specifically? The Prime Minister's own country? The country with the largest share of viewers? Meta has not explained. What it has said after the story went public is what it always says. It was an error. The video has since been restored. The questions this story raises about a foreign corporation's authority over Indian political speech are questions that deserve direct answers. In July 2026, weeks before the Modi video was blocked, Meta was already under severe pressure from the Indian government on a completely different matter. An investigation by the BBC revealed that Meta's Instagram platform was serving paid advertisements to evaluate the platform's content moderation. The revelations were explosive. India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology summoned Meta's representatives for a formal explanation. The government ordered the company to remove all such content immediately and to explain how this content had been allowed to appear in paid advertising. More importantly, India warned that it could remove Meta's safe harbor protection under the Information Technology Act. Safe harbor protection means social media companies are not legally responsible for what their users post, as long as they follow certain rules set by the government. If India removes this protection, Meta could become legally responsible for every post, comment, and video on Facebook and Instagram in the country. With around 400 million Facebook users in India, handling that legal risk would become extremely difficult and expensive, making it much harder for Meta to operate in India. When Meta removed PM Modi's video, the company was already under pressure from the Indian government. At the time, India had warned that it could remove Meta's safe harbor protection in one of its biggest markets. We do not know whether that pressure affected Meta's decision to block the video or whether it influenced the company's quick decision to restore it after the issue became public. Meta has never clearly explained this, but the timing is important. Both events happened just a few weeks apart. Because of that, many questions remain about why Meta made those decisions, and the company has not been very transparent about how it made them. To understand how a political video in India can cross 300 million views, you first have to understand what has happened to India's internet over the last decade. India has gone through one of the fastest digital transformations in history. In 2023, the country crossed 1 billion internet users, making it one of the largest online populations in the world. But the number alone doesn't explain the scale. What changed everything was the cost of getting online. India has some of the cheapest mobile data in the world. A gigabyte of data costs only a small fraction of what people pay in the United States or most European countries. For millions of Indians, watching videos for hours every day became affordable for the first time. At the same time, smartphones became much cheaper and more widely available. Local manufacturing, government initiatives such as Make in India, and intense competition between phone makers meant that hundreds of millions of people suddenly had access to the internet in their pockets. Then came India's social media boom. Indians are among the world's most active users of digital platforms. News, politics, entertainment, sports, comedy, education. Almost everything is consumed and shared online at an enormous scale. Content spreads rapidly through family groups, friends, creators, influencers, and recommendation algorithms, often reaching tens of millions of people within hours. That is why the numbers on platforms like Instagram and Facebook are so extraordinary. Instagram has an estimated 200 to 250 million users in India. Facebook's Indian audience is even larger, approaching 400 million users. No other country contributes more users to Meta's platforms than India. This is why India is not just another market for Meta. It is the company's largest user base anywhere in the world. Decisions involving India can affect hundreds of millions of people at once and have significant consequences for Meta's global business. When Meta makes a major decision about content in India, it is not dealing with a small regional issue. It is making decisions in one of the most important digital markets on the planet. Donald Trump, who pioneered the use of Twitter as a direct political communication tool, has 43.2 million Instagram followers. Modi has more than double. The total follower count of the next 5 major world leaders on Instagram is lower than Modi's individual count. This is not a reflection of comparative merit. It is a reflection of the size of India's connected population. The 300 million views in 24 hours was the moment that made someone decide that the video needed to be stopped and restricted in India. Meta's initial response was silence. Then, after the story had circulated widely across Indian media and social networks, the company issued a statement describing the restriction as a temporary error. The video was restored. The company did not identify what triggered the restriction. Today, most of India's online conversations happen on platforms owned by foreign companies like Meta, Google, and X. That means a decision taken by a company outside India can affect how millions of Indians receive information. The restriction tells you the fragility of any communication infrastructure that runs through a foreign corporation that is not fully accountable to the country in which it operates. Over the last few years, India has been trying to reduce that dependence. Projects like Aadhaar, UPI, DigiLocker, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, and the Digital India program are all part of a much larger plan. The goal is simple: build digital systems that are owned, managed, and governed by India instead of relying entirely on foreign companies. The removal of PM Modi's video became another example of why many people believe this is important. Whether Meta blocked the video by mistake or because of a legal request, one fact remained the same. A message from India's Prime Minister could suddenly disappear from one of the country's biggest social media platforms. For many, that raised an important question. Can a country truly be digitally independent if its biggest online platforms are controlled by companies based in another country? India has made a lot of progress in digital infrastructure, but this journey is still incomplete. Interestingly, India has already tried to build its own social media platform. In 2020, an app called Koo was launched as India's alternative to X, formerly Twitter. It supported more than 10 Indian languages and quickly gained attention. Government ministers joined the platform. Celebrities promoted it. Investors, including Excel and Tiger Global, invested around $66 million. At its peak, Koo had around 9.4 million monthly users. The idea was simple. Instead of relying on foreign platforms, India would have a social media platform built for Indian users and operating under Indian laws. But despite the early excitement, Koo struggled to compete with global platforms that already had hundreds of millions of users. In 2024, after failing to find a buyer or raise enough money, Koo shut down. Its founders said they believed India could still build a global social media company, but that dream remained unfinished. India is expected to have a digital economy worth around $1 trillion by 2026. Yet much of the money earned through advertising, online content, and digital platforms goes to American technology companies. India does have successful local platforms, but they have never grown to the same scale as Meta's platforms. India has shown that it can build world-class digital infrastructure. It has built one of the world's largest digital payment systems through UPI. It is investing in semiconductor manufacturing. It has built a successful space program and launched satellites and private rockets. Supporters of greater digital independence argue that social media should now be seen in the same way, not simply as another business, but as important national infrastructure. Koo's story also offers an important lesson. The problem was not that Indian engineers lacked the skills to build a social media platform. The real challenge was competing against companies that already had hundreds of millions of users, huge advertising businesses, and enormous financial resources. Building a platform is one challenge. Convincing hundreds of millions of people to switch to it is a much bigger one. That is why some believe India needs a long-term national strategy if it wants to build its own large social media platform. Not just another startup, but a project supported with the same long-term planning that India has used for sectors like digital payments, semiconductors, ports, and space technology. The video by PM Modi was posted in the middle of a genuine national crisis, one that had been building for weeks and had already produced the resignation of a cabinet minister, a landmark piece of legislation, and the largest youth protest movement India had seen in years. To understand what the video was responding to and why 303 million people watched it within 24 hours, the story of the NEET UG 2026 paper leak must be covered. The National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test for Undergraduate Medical Admissions, NEET UG, is taken by approximately 2 million students every year. It is one of the most consequential examinations in India's educational system. A medical seat in India is among the most coveted outcomes of 12 years of education. The competition is extreme, and the emotional investment of students and their families is total. Many students spend 2 to 3 years preparing after completing their school examinations. Coaching centers in cities like Kota, Rakkot, and Hyderabad run industries worth thousands of crore rupees catering specifically to NEET aspirants. On May 3, 2026, that examination was administered across India. On May 12th, it was canceled. The paper had been leaked, sold, in some accounts available before the examination date to those who could pay. How many students benefited from the leaked paper is not known. What is known is that the examination had to be voided, the results scrapped, and millions of students, who had done nothing wrong, told that the year of preparation that had culminated in the May 3rd examination had been wasted. The re-examination was conducted on June 21, 2026, just 6 weeks after the cancellation, across 5,440 examination centers. Results were declared on July 16, 2026. The CBI filed a charge sheet against 13 accused. The foot soldiers of the leak, coaching institute faculty, middlemen, candidates who bought the paper, were in custody, but the network that had sourced and sold questions before the exam was still being unraveled. The origin of the leak, the money trail, the people at the top of a criminal enterprise that had defrauded 2 million students. The investigation was ongoing, the charge sheet was filed, but the complete chain of accountability that the students were demanding had not yet been established. The protest movement that emerged from the NEET crisis did not come from nowhere. The Cockroach Janta Party's initial demands were specific and reasonable: accountability for the paper leak, identify, arrest, and prosecute the people responsible for the NEET leak, compensation for the families of students who had died by suicide following the cancellation of results, a reform of the examination system to make it genuinely secure, and the resignation of Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan, who, as the minister responsible for the examination system, was held politically accountable for the failure that had occurred on his watch. Dharmendra Pradhan resigned on July 25th. Prime Minister Modi announced on July 25th a high-powered task force headed by Nandan Nilekani, the co-founder of Infosys and architect of the Aadhaar system, to recommend technology-driven reforms that make public examinations structurally leak-proof rather than simply criminally deterred. The government's response on the legislative side was comprehensive and moved faster than most had expected. The Public Examinations Prevention of Unfair Means Amendment Bill 2026 was cleared by the Union Cabinet on July 24th and introduced in the Lok Sabha on July 27th by Union Minister Dr. Jitendra Singh. The bill increases the maximum prison sentence for paper leak offenses from 5 years to 10 years. The maximum fine for individuals rises from 10 lakh rupee to 50 lakh rupees. Service provider companies found complicit face fines of up to 5 crore rupees, 5 times the previous ceiling, and are barred from conducting any public examination for 8 years instead of 4. For directors and senior management of service provider firms personally involved in offenses, individual criminal liability now attaches. Investigations must be completed within 60 days of registering a case. Every state and union territory is required to designate special fast-track courts, where trials must be completed within 3 months of a charge sheet being filed. High court appeals from these courts must be disposed of within 3 months of admission. A central special task force can be constituted by the government for serious cases, separate from regular police investigation. The bill lists 15 specific offenses including leaking question papers, tampering with OMR sheets, creating fake examination websites, issuing fraudulent admit cards, and impersonation. The approach is deliberate, harsher punishment for those who break the system, and a complete redesign of the system so that breaking it becomes exponentially harder. But something else had been happening throughout this entire movement that deserves its own examination. India has seen this pattern before. It is a documented phenomenon in protest movements globally. A legitimate movement, organized around a real grievance, attracts genuine participants. It also attracts a second category of presence: individuals whose goal is not the resolution of the grievance, but the escalation of the protest into a confrontation that serves different political objectives. The NEET paper leak was a real failure. The students who camped at Jantar Mantar for weeks, their anger was legitimate. Their demands were reasonable, and the government ultimately acknowledged this. Dharmendra Pradhan resigned, the anti-paper leak bill was introduced, the Nilekani Task Force was constituted. But the people who pelted stones at a special commissioner of police and injured over 50 officers on July 20th were not making a demand about examination reform. They were making a different kind of statement. Stone pelting at a security barricade during a declared unlawful assembly is not a form of political expression. It is a deliberate act of violence designed to escalate a confrontation into a law and order emergency. The effect of that escalation is predictable. It shifts media coverage from the legitimate grievance to the violence. It gives the government a law and order justification for a forceful response, and it delegitimizes the larger movement by association with the violence. Who benefits from delegitimizing a student movement that was gaining massive public sympathy? Not the students, not the genuine protesters who had traveled from other states and were now being depicted as stone pelters. The people who benefit are the people who want to see India destabilized, who want a confrontation between the government and the youth. The CJP's own spokesperson, Ashutosh Ranka, an IIT and LSE graduate who was one of the central negotiators in the talks with the government, was among those who raised concerns about the infiltration of the protest by elements who did not share the movement's goals. The protest's legitimate leadership found itself in the position of trying to maintain control of a gathering that had grown beyond their ability to police. This is the point at which the foreign funding story re-enters the picture. Not because the CJP was funded by foreign interests. The MEA has said it found no evidence of this, but because the broader ecosystem of organized political destabilization operates exactly in this way. Not by funding a movement, but by providing resources to the people at its edges who will push it in directions its legitimate leadership cannot control. The stone that hit the Special Commissioner of Police may have been thrown by a domestic miscreant with no foreign connection. Or it may have been thrown by someone who arrived at Jantar Mantar not as a student, but as an operative. Here's why foreign funding and exam protests belong in the same conversation. The FCRA amendment bill and the anti-paper leak bill are being discussed across social media platforms, across news portals, across primetime debates and YouTube channels. The two conversations have been running in parallel. The question of who funded the logistics of a movement that brought tens of thousands of people to Delhi from across the country, the travel, the food, the tents, the sustained digital amplification, has not been officially answered, but it has been loudly asked. India's examination system is not primarily threatened by foreign funding. Paper leaks are domestic crimes, committed by Indian criminal gangs who sell question papers to Indian students who can pay, sometimes facilitated by insiders within the examining bodies. The NEET paper leak is, at its heart, a domestic failure of institutional integrity. FCRA is not the solution to paper leaks. The protest movement that achieved genuine accountability for examination fraud was also the protest that produced stone pelting and anti-India slogans. Those are two different things happening simultaneously, and they require separate analysis. This is exactly the kind of political instability that foreign-funded networks can exploit and amplify. India is not alleging that the protest was foreign-funded. What India is arguing through the FCRA amendment is that it needs the ability to answer such questions definitively when they arise. The designated authority that FCRA creates, the personal accountability that FCRA imposes, the state-level spending reports that FCRA requires. These are tools for answering the question, where does the money come from, and what does it do when it arrives? The pattern of India's political disruptions over the past decade consistently includes a legitimate domestic grievance, an organized protest movement, and, at some point, an escalation into violence that serves interests different from those of the legitimate protesters. The wrestlers' protest in 2023, the Farm Laws protests in 2020 to 21, the Citizenship Amendment Act protests in 2019 to 20. Each one began with a genuine grievance. Each one produced moments that could not be fully explained by the frustration of legitimate protesters alone. Each one was, at some point, subjected to the question of foreign funding and foreign interference. India's response to this pattern has been to build the legal infrastructure to answer these questions with evidence rather than allegation. FCRA's transparency requirements do not assume that any miscreant is foreign fund supported. They create the conditions under which that question can be answered factually. The amendment bill's designated authority, personal accountability provisions, and state-level reporting requirements are the specific tools that move the question from speculation to documentation. What connects the PM Modi Instagram world record, the Facebook block, the CJP protest, the NEET paper leak, the anti-paper leak bill, and the FCRA amendment is a single underlying reality. India is, in 2026, a country in which information, funding, political mobilization, and institutional accountability are all simultaneously contested. A foreign corporation can block the Prime Minister's message on its own platform and call it an error. A student movement can begin as a legitimate demand for examination accountability and become, within weeks, a violent confrontation. What India is building, through the IT rules, through the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, through the anti-paper leak bill, through the Nilekani Task Force, is the institutional infrastructure to navigate all of this with evidence rather than assumption. To know where the money comes from, to know where the information goes, to know who is accountable for what happened, and to be able to prove it. That project is harder than building a bullet train or launching a semiconductor fab. It requires not steel and concrete, but legal architecture, data infrastructure, and the political will to apply accountability consistently rather than selectively. India is still building it. The anti-paper leak bill is the concrete outcome. The Nilekani Task Force is the systemic response. The FCRA amendment is the financial transparency layer. Together, these stories raise a bigger question. How does a large democracy protect free speech, fair elections, public trust, and national security in a world where information, money, and influence can cross borders in seconds? India is building the laws, institutions, and digital systems needed to answer these questions, step by step. It is working towards a future where its democracy is more transparent and more secure.